everybody to the Living Economy Salon. A lot of you have been doing this with us for many years. We started in 2009. This is quite a while ago now.
What was it called then?
It was called the Emerging Currency Salon, because we wanted to talk about new economic models. Then we got a little more busy in like 2010, 11, 12. We were doing them almost every month. And then just life happened and we didn't have a space. And we didn't do it for a while. We did them like once a year for the past 2 or 3 years. But now we decided we're going to get back on it because now we have a space. We're going to do them here. So we're going to do this more often. So we're still working out logistics. So anyway, we do have a website, livingeconomysalon.com, where we've put bios and links to every single speaker we've had since we started. So it's a great resource to read about like what we've been talking about. But on that website, our sort of mission statement is that we are committed to fostering a dialogue around new economic models that promise a more fair and abundant economy for all living things. So that is our commitment. That's what we care about.
Are there recordings on the site or just?
You know, we do have a couple things recorded. One of them is of Eric, which we did a great recording of his, but then due to financial limitations, we haven't recorded everything, but there are some things.
Thank you.
And so that's the Living Economy Salon. Thank you all so much for coming. And then I'm going to give the floor to Greg, who's going to introduce Rafe.
Got it. Thank you. Welcome. You've basically got the essence of what we're here for, and it's a space of inquiry. It's a space of conversation. One of the things that inspired our work is when we did conferences in 2009 and 10, there were so many people that came when we said this is not a conference for speaking at and speaking with. So many people that wanted to speak at the conferences, we invited to come and speak at our salons instead and do the presentation they would have done at a conference keynote and do them here. But it's more of a conversation rather than a presentation. So we're going to spend about a short amount of time doing a little bit of context, and then we're going to have some Q&A or however we roll with it. And I want to introduce you. My name is Greg Wendt, by the way, and Robin Shank, who's disappeared somewhere. Robin is the anchor of a lot of the work that I do here. She's our operations team. We have several businesses and activities being run out of our office, and it's right on the hall. We've been in this co-working space since 2012, and many more things you can learn offline. And we met in 2009, 10?
Feels about right.
When you were doing Crowdfunder and before Crowdfunder, that's right, and then you launched Crowdfunder. What was so thought-provoking about our conversations at the time was, for me, about that you were someone that I felt was very passionate about the ideas that I was, which is how do we treat financial markets with collective intelligence, multidisciplinary perspectives, come together in new and innovative ways of financial markets and securities generation that led to you doing Crowdfunder. And I think the essence of what we've always shared, Rafe, is this idea that there is a different way than the mean and the structures of finance and the rules of finance that have been handed to us, because the very institutions that we have inherited were not designed to solve the problems of today, and it is incumbent upon our generation to create a multidisciplinary, multicultural, multi-perspective approach to innovating a financial system that actually addresses the systemic challenges on the planet, and the systemic problems on the planet, because you got it. So I won't say any more, and that's why I felt we've always been very aligned. And then recently, I want to make sure you signal and talk a little bit about Economic Space Agency tonight and your company and your background. And I feel like a great start, like Hollis was asking about when we talked earlier, is for those of us, everyone knows what Bitcoin is, I'm sure, right? Now,
but don't be shy if you don't.
Well, that's exactly. And this is the thing is that there's no question that's too naive, because I often ask very naive sounding questions because I just want to know the basics to make sure I'm on the same channel. So I think it's good for me to do a little primer, and then whatever you feel, take it away. And
yeah, let's feel into this.
So the question was, what is blockchain and how can it be for the world?
Yeah, that's always the question. Right? So I'm going to ask you guys a question to get some context. So who has bought Bitcoin? Has anybody bought Ethereum? Okay. Has anybody bought Steam? Okay. All right. So that gives me a sense. And who is brave enough to say that they don't understand how the internet works, really?
Oh, really? Like, yeah, sure, no, I don't understand how it's
Yeah.
really.
Really? Right, how those little hamsters get the information from. All right, really? So,
None of us are Al Gore, so we all should.
I don't know how it works really.
I don't know how Al Gore works.
Really?
Hard. He works hard.
I know how I work.
Yeah. So the key to understanding Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrencies is you don't really have to understand it. Do you understand the web? You know? No,
Yeah.
you use it, right? If it's useful. Okay, so we're going to forget about Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrencies. I'm going to tell you about a few different coins, tokens, cryptocurrencies. They all mean the same thing. And just by example, we'll interpolate what these things are.
I have an interruption.
Is that okay? Yes.
Before you go there,
Okay.
who the hell are you?
Oh,
In a good way.
yeah. Okay, background. I grew up right here.
Oh,
Yeah. Ozone.
Ozone.
Ozone
Wow.
and Speedway. So this is my old stomping ground, despite the fact I couldn't find parking.
And how did you arrive at the point that we want to be the speaker
So
about
I
crypto?
got, my first intellectual love was computers. I was like the computer geek, whiz kid. And I studied computer science and cognitive sciences and artificial intelligence. And I also was fascinated, always been fascinated with gambling and gaming, right? And I played poker from an early age. And so the idea of gamifying finance and money and being able to program it was really just part of me growing up. And so just very, very quick career path. I was in Palo Alto when the first web browser came along. I saw it and I was like, wow, this is great, it's gonna change the world. 4 years later, I started a company, an early web company, and I was an entrepreneur for the first time. Hit it really good in terms of timing, got lucky, didn't know how lucky I got, but had the whole life cycle, had a modest exit, and that started my career as an angel investor. So funding companies and venture capital, seeing how that whole thing works, and learning a lot, making mistakes, getting lucky, getting unlucky, just really have a lot of experience at the early stage of starting companies. And I've founded a few other companies and invested in a bunch, and I've created a few funds using new economic models and the theme around, and I've always been fascinated experimenting with different economic models. Just for example, one of the things that came out of the poker world was this idea of investing in people, not giving them a loan, not investing in their company, but actually investing in their equity or their future income. And that got a lot of buzz and excitement and got me to speak at places like TED and whatnot. But, and that was actually around the time when I think you said you have to watch this incredible TED Talk that Hollis gave at Burning Man. I don't know if you remember this, but you were talking about new currencies
You
and stuff like
remember
that.
that.
Well, if you were at Burning Man, do you remember? That's a good question, right? And you were speaking about this thing called Demerol, which was this idea of, currencies don't have to always be printed and inflate, right? This idea of inflation, hyperinflation, or we're going, it's an inflation rate, adjusting the inflation rate. And without going too far down the rabbit hole, you're like, well, actually in the 30s in a town called Urgel, they actually did the opposite. They took currency out of circulation and they encouraged spending. And so this idea of gamifying money, it's like, wow, we could really do a lot of stuff. So long story short, that was like maybe in the 2012 time frame. I had just heard about this thing called Bitcoin. And it was really, really small, but this idea that you could program money and there's no central authority that creates it, which is a key feature. We'll get back into it. I'm not going to talk about Bitcoin right away because it's harder to understand. It's so simple. But that's kind of the history.
So tell us about what you want to talk about with respect to Ephes crypto, and why are you involved, and what's happening here? What are the interesting developments in general?
Yeah.
And
So
without having to understand like how the internet works, but just give us a breakdown of what crypto
Yeah.
blockchain is.
So let's talk about the
We need to know.
application.
Yeah.
What are the killer apps?
Like
right?
what made Bitcoin a novel thing that came out? Why
We're not
is
going to talk
that?
about Bitcoin. We're going to talk about
What-
Filecoin.
What are you rating? Tell us
Okay.
about whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, Filecoin, and we'll get back to it. I have to tell you about Filecoin before I can tell you about Bitcoin. So what Filecoin is, and Filecoin, I just invested in it today. Did you invest in Filecoin?
I mean, I would, but I did not.
All right. So Filecoin is this decentralized application. I'll tell you what that means in a second. But does anybody remember BitTorrent? Anybody use BitTorrent? Okay.
Does anyone not know what it is and want to know?
BitTorrent is a file sharing like Napster, right? So it allows people, if they have their computers, to upload files like songs and movies and whatnot that they have, and then share them for other people around the world. And the way BitTorrent works is that you upload your copy of the file, and it's basically pushed out to everybody else's computer and downloaded to their computer. So we're all hosting this one large virtual file system. Right? So there's this virtual file system. It's supported by all of our hard drives in our computers, and we all have access to this one virtual file system where all these files can live. So any of us can access any of the files in our individual libraries. That's a decentralized file system.
Can I ask a quick question about
Yes.
that, which I always wondered? How much space does it take up on all of the various people? A very minute amount?
Well, it might take a small amount on mine and a small amount on yours, but we have millions
That's
of
what I'm
people
thinking, yeah.
collectively.
So the entire film doesn't ding anybody individually, but it's available to everybody.
Yeah, I mean in theory. So that's the way it conceptually works. And everybody knows how popular cloud-based storage is, like Amazon and Dropbox and Google, right? It's just better to rent it from the cloud as opposed to have to buy your own disk. Well, Filecoin combines these two concepts, the idea of cloud-based service, which Amazon and Dropbox and Google, they're all centralized. There's companies that purchase massive data warehouses, and they centrally store all your stuff. Right? They bring all the files from your computer and put it there and reflect it back to you. Well, combining that cloud layer, but doing it in a decentralized way, like BitTorrent. So, Filecoin at one level is a protocol. Right? Just like the internet is a protocol. You speak the language, you can use the applications. One of them is Filecoin. Filecoin has this protocol, and if you run the Filecoin application or protocol on your computer, you are granting permission to the cloud to store some of itself in a secure, encrypted, private way on your computer, and then everybody else doing the same. So the more of us who are running this Filecoin protocol, the more we have available for all of us to use. So instead of maybe using AWS or Google or Dropbox, we could actually use Filecoin. Okay, so the final piece of the puzzle that you have to understand is the economics. Right? BitTorrent was free, or I should say donated. People donated their space into the collective. It's open source ethos. Nice machine. Right. So the economics, how does it work? Well, if you're someone who contributes disk space to the network, you get paid in this thing called Filecoin. It's like a token, a reward point, whatever you want to call it, a credit. You get paid in Filecoin. Now, what if you don't actually have disk space to put up. You're looking for disk space, and you want to store your files, and you want to buy disk space from Filecoin. You pay in Filecoin. Okay. Where do you get it though? Okay, so there's a market for Filecoin. You can go on to this open market and buy a Filecoin at a market price.
With dollars.
With dollars. Dollars, Bitcoin, euros, any other cryptocurrency, Ether.
It's almost like solar feeding back into the grid.
There you go. Yes, exactly right. So it's like this marketplace for a unnatural resource, right? In the solar case, it's a natural resource. In the Filecoin example, it's a man-made resource, a commodity, right? Hard drive space, disk space. So, combining these things, decentralization, peer-to-peer file sharing, or cloud-based storage, decentralized peer-to-peer, and the economics needed to actually complete the loop and give everybody the incentives to play well with each other and create a bigger pie for us to all share, you get Filecoin. So there's this whole economy of file storage. Filecoin is its own little mini economy for people who care about and interact with file storage. Okay, so that's Filecoin. It's its own little ecosystem, yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I just might add to that, for people that care about file storage and would rather be supporting a distributed model than paying Amazon or Google
Yes.
or whoever else they might pay.
Thank you, yes. So there will also, yeah, so get to that. Yes, that's really important. So why would you care about Filecoin, right? Isn't it cheaper to, and safer to go with Google and AWS? The answer is it's cheaper to go here because there's no company to support, for one. And it's more scalable. Right? So here's some numbers. I had to refresh myself. So okay, so it's not going to surprise you if there's this marketplace or this economy for file storage, that there's a similar marketplace or economy for computing power. Right? Computing power is a commodity the same way. So I'm going to give you some numbers on the scalability of this decentralized model in computing power, but the same economics apply for file storage and any other network effect. Okay. So in 2009, Google itself, all of Google was estimated to be able to power 100 petaflops of information. You don't have to know what a petaflop is. That's the base. 100 petaflops. At that same time, a few years later, the NSA built this complex in Utah. So all of NSA's computing power is about 100 petaflops. And these are the biggest kind of single central computing centers in the world. Google's, Amazon, Microsoft, NSA, China, right, government. Okay, 2009. 2013, Bitcoin just started, so there's 0 petaflops in 2009. By 2013, Bitcoin had the power of 64,000 petaflops. Okay, at that time it was 256 times the top 500 supercomputers combined. Okay, so 100 to 64,000 in 4 years. Okay, 2015 Bitcoin was 524 times the size of Google. And in 2017, this year, continuing to grow exponentially, Bitcoin has 84 million petaflops. Okay, so if you are Google or Amazon, and your business is based on these commodity computing resources, be scared. Be real scared, because the decentralized world, these coins, are going to take over that business. They're already starting to.
Is it important if you're in one of these exchanges to have your computer on 24 hours a day? Is that a requirement so that you don't
Only
get
if you
behind?
want to receive the rewards of doing that, because the whole network is resilient, and that doesn't depend on you or me or anybody.
Is that mining?
It's mining. Yeah. This is mining. So that, on the Filecoin network, that's how you mine. That's how you get the reward, is you offer up your space. One of the
You
ways.
have a question?
Well, I mean, it's about the quality of the computation and the speed of delivery and the reliability of delivery. I mean, we know BitTorrent works until it doesn't, until you find a file that no one's hosting, things like that. So I wonder about, this is more of just like an open thing, I wonder about the mixture in the future where there are going to be some applications that need that level of, it's a giant room full of computers that are managed by people, and it's very efficient, the interconnect, every single latency has been removed. And so I guess I wonder how much this can scale in terms of, because when we're talking about petaflops, we're not talking about applied. I mean, that's just solving hashing problems. It's just a factorization algorithm. It's not like mixed load computations and AWS lets you host entire applications in there. So I think the question seems like it's going to be how will this, not just performance when you measure it with that kind of metric, but like actual quality of computing to build applications.
Sure.
How will that scale? Because I'm just curious.
Good question.
Translate and answer.
Yeah. So
Resilience, reliability.
So what I'm going to say, I know the answer. I know
Great question.
I know what you're asking. I'll try to.
Yeah, we don't have
analogize
it.
So
It's relevant.
we are very early in the development of this entirely new paradigm of computation. We're about, I would say, somewhere around 1996, 97 in the internet. So people have started to hear about this thing called the web, but nobody knows what it is. Nobody knows why it's useful to them yet, except for the geeks, right? And the people who actually are not plugged in, like they're not going to go on to Google, but they have problems that these decentralized applications can solve, like money remittance. How do you transfer money across borders in small amounts without, long wait times and usurious fees?
I want to talk about that just for a moment. And central banks have to be the central clearinghouse for all bank transfers and banking. So central banks are really deep into reflecting on, if I don't need to be the go-between between you depositing the check and me making sure you get the money, there's a way that there's a secure, trusted way for it just to be done, but the central bank oversees that. That's one of the areas that central banks are exploring, how to utilize these systems of information and secure contracts to make this actually work. So that's just giving you a minimal, and we could do a whole salon on that alone, but I just wanted to give a little context of what that looks like.
So I think we'll get there. In a sec. I want to show. I'm going to give one more example that will make it a little bit more concrete to you, perhaps. I'm just saying, what I want you to see is like every single industry, every single sector, there are blockchain applications, cryptocurrencies, if you will, that are aiming to decentralize the centralized businesses and business models. Just like I was talking about this one little sector of cloud-based computation. So who posts on Facebook or Twitter or Reddit or Medium, right? Creative stuff, right? We all know what this thing is. Well, you know that when you post content on Facebook, they own it immediately. It's not your content anymore, right? And then if it does become popular and people share it, you're really happy because that's the point of sharing it. You want that to happen. But guess what they do? They then just monetize that to the highest bidder.
Yeah, Facebook's happier.
Super happy. Yeah, Facebook's really happy. And so they have tens of billions of dollars a year monetizing your content, extracting all that value. Well, you get some residual value because we're all cogs in the machine now and we're feeding their profits. But what if I told you that there was a network, a decentralized network, a coin, where you own the content, there is no Facebook, there are no advertisers. When you post and it goes viral, you get paid directly and immediately in the coin of the realm. It's called Steem, Steemit. And it's just one of several decentralized publishing platforms. And furthermore, the people who are doing the sharing and liking and the curating of content, well, they're adding a ton of value to the network too, so they're getting paid too. there's no middleman or woman between creators of content and the fans or readers or consumers of the content. It's its own little and big and growing ecosystem where there's no central company and there's no advertisers and there's no bias. It's just what people are sharing with one another. I wouldn't really want to be Facebook or Reddit or Medium right now either.
Right now, you
Well, maybe in a couple of years.
A couple quick, relevant, to the point questions, because we can go down rabbit holes, so let's just make sure to keep it really high level and succinct to what's being discussed now. We have 5 people that want to talk, and that can take 10 minutes alone. So make sure your comments are really quick, please. Because we're not in Q&A yet, so Alan,
Okay.
you, Pod, or do you want to are we going to go into Q&A?
It's all the same.
Okay, right,
Yeah,
great.
we want to do, like, okay, so
So let's go this way, right? And hold your
we're
thought.
just gonna like sort of let each person have their say, and then we're just gonna take answers off of all of that. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try to make this really quick. So peer-to-peer business models have been around for a long time, and probably Napster's what made most people familiar with what was out there. So my concern would be, how do people or companies protect intellectual property, and what prevents any kind of government oversight from stepping in and saying, we don't give a shit, we're going to start blocking all these IPs, we're going to start shutting this whole thing down, because the big corporations don't like all the intellectual property being swapped around. And even certain Bitcoin offices, even the guys that had that office in Japan got shut down. But it's not unusual for BitTorrents and for various different groups, once they decide to block them or stop them, that happens in various different countries. Now, they can't stop it worldwide,
Okay.
but how do you protect intellectual property?
Good point.
And
Yeah, so we're just gonna kind of like hear what everybody's asking, and
Yeah.
then, so next, yes.
Very quickly, you know Jerome Lanier's book, Who Owns the Future? No, yes, no? Okay, he basically talks about the problem you were just addressing, which is we provide all the value to those, he calls them sirens, and they make all the money. And he said, you know, if everyone got that little percentile of a percentile, that would be the radical change we need. Are you saying that makes this possible? Excellent.
Hi.
So the populist mantra behind cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin is just that it's populism, that it is anti-establishment, that it is anti-Federal Reserve, decentralized. What's the potential likelihood that blockchain is technically the epitome of government, the epitome of future guidance and synthesis, versus this populist anti-anti-anti?
Good question. Three more after that.
Yeah, so
Succinct, thank you.
yeah, it seems like in your description of all of these cryptocurrencies, there's a full loop of value, and I'm just trying to understand how that applies to Bitcoin specifically.
Thank you. Gary.
Yeah, kind of similar there, but just in terms of the decentralized, but how is the governance of the system? Because, like I'm used to things like Visa with it, where you've got a chaotic system that's owned by multiple people, and when you're saying it's owned by nobody, that's flipping the equation. So how do you create a governance system around nobody owning it?
Good, great question. And then?
And rather than even worrying about governance, more central to that, just the prevention of bad actor, irrespective of governance.
Just one reason we have governance.
Thank you. All good things.
He's a plant, by the way.
Proper
I think in the early this was the original reason.
Original intent is that.
Yeah. Welcome.
So, good, okay, so.
And these are all kind of thematically.
Yeah, we're going to start here, and we're going to talk about, so just, I'll note that there's a difference between governance and government,
Yes.
okay? And so all institutions have governance, whether you're a corporation, a nonprofit, or a government. But the institutions themselves are bureaucracies. That's the technology by which governance happens.
Right.
It's manual, paper, meatware, wetware, right? It's not automated, it's not software, it's not modern.
Right.
So you got the punchline, right? This decentralization revolution is existentially threatening to centralized institutions, full stop. So corporations, nonprofit organizations, and governments are not necessarily going to exist in the way that they do now, in terms of really having the power.
Let's down to the common joke.
What's that?
Okay, I write a book,
Yep.
somebody steals it, they put it out there, that devalues the
Intellectual
value of my book.
property is not necessarily a universal good. Just
Hold that.
hold that thought. So your question,
My question was, you were talking about how it seems like all these cryptocurrencies have a value in, a value out and a value in, kind of comes back. And I was wondering if you could just point that out in Bitcoin.
yeah. So right, the reason why I didn't start with Bitcoin is, so you're talking about the notion of backing.
Right.
Or what's the fundamental value? Okay.
Right.
So in currency design, you really need 4 things to program a currency, to create your own currency. You need an issuance model, or a way to issue. You need a backing, right? What backs the currency. You need a redeemability function. Can you redeem the currency for the backing, for instance, or under what conditions? And then you need governance, and that's what actually ties these things together and makes them work. And governance also is self-referential. So is it possible or not, and under what terms, to actually change the governance itself? Can you create a living economy?
And I'll add a 5th or a 6th under layer, which is implied, which is in order to play a game on a field with rules, you have to have even a war requires a certain degree of rules that have to have a common understanding where there is a bond of trust, ironically, in even such something as, so then there's a relational fabric of us that have a simple degree of trust from which these governance, guidance models, and then one of the things that's been most innovative that we've uncovered over the last, or we've reflected on over the years is that very base layer of reality in the relational framework is something that's fungible, that we have a role in redesigning the way that these various systems of relational networks and larger system actually work. And that's something that is one of the greatest implications that is often not reflected on, because most people are just assuming that's the way things are, the way human nature is, but that is all really up for question continuously. And that's the kind of work that a lot of us are doing in the way that we're reflecting on intimate relationships and all those things in society. In fact,
So maybe we would talk about trust is one of those things that is one of the fundamental breakthroughs in the Bitcoin blockchain, which was the very first cryptocurrency, the very first blockchain was the Bitcoin blockchain. So the reason why it's so hard to talk about and understand the value of Bitcoin is there's nothing backing, okay? Unlike the 3 currencies that I talked about, Filecoin is backed by delivery of file storage, right? Golem is backed by the delivery of computing power, and Steemit is backed by the content and the sharing thereof.
But you know what that's interesting is that the US dollar has no backing except for that we trust that you will use it.
It used to.
It used to, but I mean the whole point about backing and that what is actually a hard backable thing became an irrelevant conversation in our minds, and that's a whole conversation about gold standard and all
We
that.
are on an experiment that will end badly.
Well, that's a topic of a salon as well, because what I'm saying, my point is that the backing is that we all have a network of trust. In God we trust is actually in the Fed we trust, or in the Treasury we trust, where this is in Bitcoin maybe implying in each other we trust.
Fiat means faith, right?
That, exactly.
Fiat means by decree.
And there's all those kind of debates that I don't want to get into, but I was just reflecting on the notion that there is no such real backing, and then the file currency might actually be a
I
more
mean,
backing.
I want to, as a math nerd, because I'm a math nerd,
Yeah,
I'm going to go with, there is a bet, okay, if I'm sitting on a gold mine, I'm actually like a real one, like
Yeah.
a real gold mine.
Yeah.
You know, to get the gold out of the ground, there's going to be there's going to be some effort in that expression. Right?
Well, that's a whole salon that we might want to do about the back of fiat currency.
You could
What I'm saying
monetize.
is that there is
Might not
effort
forget
in
costs,
the
right?
extraction. There's
Yeah,
effort
yeah.
through the extraction. And durable costs in there.
Mhm.
Now, I can't just whip up a Bitcoin miner.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's 20 GPUs, it's like 15 grand. It's real dollars.
Yeah.
Someone's got to buy them, right? Like, and then that process, you know, like it will generate a certain amount of prolificness in a coin over a period of time. So there's dollars going in. People who believe that this is just a one-time magic beans and we're just, you know, making this shit up as we go along, you know.
So I wanted to say one thing. I wasn't raising that to say what it is that it is back
Yeah,
here.
fair.
It's like who we are and how we relate as the
Fair.
essential fabric in order for us to trust what it is
Mm.
the underlayer that I was trying to raise rather than getting into the details of.
Yeah, and just that, like,
So-
you
so
know
I-
that for every $1 that goes into gold mining, $3 comes out the back.
Yeah.
And that's just the expression of the model. To extract 1 ounce of gold, you're gonna spend $400 American dollars to get it. That's just when you own gold and have the mine, it's yours. Period. Like, because it's all attached to rocks and shit.
Yes.
So I think I can tie these things together now that we've actually had this discussion, which is, one would argue that the US dollar, fiat US dollar, not the gold standard dollar, but the fiat US dollar is backed by the taxes that are backed by the GDP of the economy, right? Okay, that's the backing. That's what we have faith in. Similarly, with Bitcoin, the backing is the opportunity cost of all those petaflops that are spent mining Bitcoin that otherwise could be used to do all sorts of things in the world. Lots of things, right? So there is value there, but it's just not as tangible and easy to get your head around as file storage.
Well,
gold.
filing has both, right? It has the opportunity cost plus the actual function.
Yes.
Yeah. It is, so one of the things that's been intriguing me recently, and Chris and I, that's Chris Hughes. Chris is actually he is the person who in 2011 broke into my house and said, Rafe, there's this thing called Bitcoin, I think you gotta learn about this. He was doing early mining. And fun story, he mined some of the early coins, and then he used it to buy gold when it passed.
Bad move, bro.
I was gonna say
Real bad move, bro.
any wise pound foolish.
And some platinum. Bad move still.
Anyway, so is it possible? Like one of the things that's intrigued me, is it possible? Okay, we have all this people. One of the things that's a big debate in the Bitcoin world is, in the blockchain world is these people are spending so much money on energy, right? If you're a miner, you need to have a massive server farm. You need to be have specialized hardware, which costs a lot of money. You have to get cheap electricity because you won't be competitive. So you have to co-locate your servers where you can get cheap electricity. And you have to cool down those hardware. So you might, think, oh, let's go to the desert and do solar farms. But then you have to spend to cool. So it's really, really wasteful in some sense, because the only thing you get out of it is this magic fairy money, right? But what if it was possible to actually mine and back the currency, design the currency that is backed by the future delivery of energy? Just kind of like.
There's a group called, I heard a group called Solar Coin. Is that what you're aware of? Are they doing that, or is that?
So there are now, just as of late, a bunch of energy-related or energy-backed coins. So like I said, every single industry, every single endeavor on the planet, supply chain, agriculture, you know,
Insurance,
transportation.
energy is the most obvious one.
Finance, right? So that's a whole thing. But finance, as we know it, is just about to go supernova. It's going to be completely taken away from the masters of the universe.
Okay, so my big question about this is taxes. Like, how, like you said, this is going to make government obsolete, right? Sounds super exciting, like this decentralized. What are we going to do about, like, that's what kills most of complementary currencies is the tax burden. Like, oh, well, I sold this product and I made this much money in this complementary currency, but I have to pay U.S. taxes and it drains the complementary currency.
Totally. So yeah, so I forgot to address this. This was part of your question.
Still holding my thought.
Oh yeah.
So
You can breathe now.
Let me simplify something. Okay, I create something
Yeah.
so I can feed myself, but that's not important. So now I have nothing to feed myself, so I die. So I have no incentive to create anything that's going to be widely distributed, and I don't get anything back for the efforts and time that I put into something, whether it be a film, or music, or a book, or anything of that sort. So how?
Well, I just showed you a model where you don't have to record the copyright or the intellectual property. You can monetize it directly now and in perpetuity by directly selling it or directly getting money from the network for people actually using it, actually consuming it, actually like.
How do you prevent somebody from?
But so can anybody else.
Well,
Yeah, so does
it's time
everybody
to
else.
talk about what
Yeah.
a blockchain actually is, a little bit, just a tiny bit, because in the
that's
beginning of the
very
internet, there was this idea that you would hyperlink to everything. There would be one file.
Hold on a second, let's make sure that everyone needs that. Does anyone need
Yes,
what?
let's
Great.
let him
I just want to make
do-
sure that we're all-
I'll make it
From
really
the
fast.
lay
I'll make it
person.
really fast.
Yeah.
Okay. You have one file. Today in this internet, we make copies of everything all fast. But there is the blockchain, the benefit, the thing is that you can say, back then, in this time, at this exact position in the chain or in the network, is this box that is sealed cryptographically, and that contains whatever object it is, transaction, piece of art, whatever it is. Now, instead of making copies, you make a reference. So it can be different. It has this opportunity to be different. The cost of trying to make a copy of it is exorbitant. You would need 51% of the network. We can go into that, but it's not, it's possible, but it's very difficult. Unlike a BitTorrent where it's just endless copies of zeros and ones. This has a hard cost to making any kind of change to the block once it's been secured by all that effort. So the possibility is there to make a coin for art. You put your art in it, and then every time someone looks at it, since it knows about itself, it's the ultimate cybernetic thing. If anyone's a 70s cybernetic fan, it's the ultimate cybernetic thing. It's a loop. You look at it, it knows you looked at it, and it can reward you directly in that way. So it's a new kind of database. It's not just a list of Excel spreadsheet kind of nonsense. No, it's these little, each entry could potentially be its own totally signed secure box that's all linked to each other. So that's the difference, and that's the paradigm.
So you get a reference,
Translate the
okay,
So-
you get a credit for putting something out there. So I understand the residual aspect. Okay, so that takes care of that. But what about the other part that a group of corporations don't like that?
So
and they
that's
want
that's
to
this part. I want to close the loop on here
Yeah.
because you made a brought a really important point. So one of the really cool aspects of blockchain technology is that it allows us to create what are called smart contracts, which is codifying relationships like intellectual property law, for instance. So you could actually enforce algorithmically, in an automated way, that which it takes entire court systems and government in fear of arrest and confiscation to do in the real world. You can actually do intellectual property way more efficiently if you chose.
Is it in place with Filepoint? Because if it is, every musician and everybody who's not getting the residuals now would want to jump on board.
So now I'm gonna go to this other thing.
Yeah.
And restate the
Yeah.
challenge of the question, generally.
Yeah. So I think that the challenge generally is the way that society is organized now requires taxation at about 50% in developing nations. Okay. It seems to require all this intellectual property law. It requires an incredibly complex set of laws to enforce trust or breach thereof, right? In business relationships or social relationships. However, if there was a way to do all that stuff more efficiently, which is to the stuff of government and to the stuff of contract law, for instance, more efficiently without the institutions, then the institutions wouldn't really be necessary. So the question becomes, and I'm not going to answer how we get from here to there, because it's not likely to be pretty. But if in a developed nation, 50% of what we produce is required to keep the government going to make it all work, right? Is that market rate? If we had a choice, if we could choose our government service provider, it wasn't a monopoly, what would be the true market price for the services of government that are really necessary to do what we need, and not all the extra stuff? And so there's been a lot of arguments, economic, mathematical, sociological, historical, and otherwise, to suggest that no, we're getting monopoly rents, or the government is getting monopoly rents for those services. And just to break it down, maybe minimum viable government would provide physical safety from outside and inside, and would provide protection of property, assets of all sorts, right? So that people can't just take your stuff, right? So if those are the services, like what should they cost? And without going through all the references, 15% is probably market rate.
I'm going to invoke and take the stage for a moment on
Yes.
the purpose of this salon was the idea of a living economy, right? And then one of the greater challenges of our civilization is how do we effectively manage the commons, wherein the commons are the home of the life support system of the planet and non-human life, from which we are deriving our capacity to live to a great extent, and we're not setting up human systems to incorporate that value into our governance and economy. And then the question becomes, what is government's role, and especially how do we utilize these innovative ways to manage the commons for the coherence of the planet, right? That's the essential root of the question that is the basis of all of our conversations, that I trust there are ways to address that, yet if we do not ask the question, we may not come to the result. And that's some of the debate we're seeing in libertarian versus all that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, that's the bigger challenge of how does the Bitcoin or the blockchain or these other distributed systems actually enable us to manage fisheries or forests or international ocean. These are the kind of challenges that the governance systems have been the least worst way to manage.
Yeah.
And then the thing is that we cannot take them out to then replace them with nothing, because then it becomes a pirate economy that we know we don't have the time to recover in the event that we destroy the forests, mine all the mines, take all the oil, and fish all the fish. So we have to manage the physical planet while we're getting through the governance of how we govern our society, and that's something that I trust we will figure out. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we address those relational issues with the non-human life in particular.
In transition, or
right now.
Starting now.
And I think I'd like to hear everyone's kind of feelings on that, because this is the root question of our bodies, and our lives. So maybe
Let's
see.
not Rafe for
Please, and then
I'll just
thank you.
Yeah, and I agree. I'm feeling like let's let everybody answer this. What I'll add to the mix is at the core, what this technology, in my mind, it does a lot of things. But one of the things that it does is it enables us to break out of the prisoner's dilemma, the tragedy of the commons, where we are all serving our own best interest, but if we were to cooperate and look at maybe a higher level of self-interest, if we could trust one another to do that, we would all be better off. We make a bigger pie, we create share value, and 1 + 1 will equal not 2, but 3 or 11, right? That's what we're trying to get to. And in a libertarian utopia, and in the Chicago School of Economics, and in Wall Street, there is no math. They don't recognize the math of network effects and shared value and cooperation, right?
Or externalities.
Or externalities, yeah.
Right?
Bingo.
Or the frame around everything else.
That's right. And so it's just one big hyper-competitive
Cult.
zero-sum game. It's a giant game of poker, right? And so one of the things that's really great, and this is nice we got here, Bitcoin and the blockchain solved the distributed trust problem, right? We don't have to know or trust anybody in the economy in order for us to trust that the network will do what it is meant to do, what it's programmed to do. And so I can follow my own self-interest, and if we've agreed to program the rules of the protocol right, everybody's better off. We break free of it's a triumph of the commons, not a tragedy of the commons.
So the middleman, the banks, were kind of like, we'll make sure that you can trust this transaction. And this is taking over what the bank's, the middleman's position was, and being the trust.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, the trusted. So we can remove the trusted third party. We can program a better government, a better a better institution.
And that middleman is
the
taking
lead?
such a tax in every transaction, and now we have like a trusted network, so we can trust our transactions
have the programming-
without a tax in between.
Yeah. What we have is the programming language for the open source society.
Right.
We have conversation brewing
Okay,
here,
cool.
and I want to make a couple process points before we go a little bit. We're nearing the end of our time. There's a couple more comments maybe we come out of this, but this is a conversation that, think of this as the yeast and the bread, and then we're going to continue discussing over whatever nibbles we have, or take a walk and go to a bar or whatever. So I want to make sure that everyone knows that this is the point, right?
Yeah.
And then we won't cover all of our points tonight, but then let's continue this thread, and then we'll come back and just close, and then we'll keep going. Is that work?
Yeah, and we're going to try to have another one in a month. So the idea is we're putting them back together so that we can build a network, we can all get to know each other better. That's why we have the snacks, so we can network. We want to do another sort of like just taking the temperature of the room, like everybody who's got a question, let's hear them all, and then go back to like Rafe answering. So if you haven't talked, I want to do Francis first. You haven't said anything?
Sure.
Go ahead.
And then you.
And then Alexandra.
Yeah, so one of the things that's been fascinating to me is kind of what we were talking about a little bit about this is, so the interaction between the blockchain and government, like where it's at now and where it might go. And of course, right now, largely anyone in government who even has an inkling of what it is afraid of it. I mean, clearly the SEC is trying to figure out how to regulate it. So a lot of the most interesting blockchain stuff and coin stuff is now going to Singapore and Switzerland or wherever. And where my mind goes, and for those of you who don't know, I'm someone who has run for office and was actually the first webcast campaign ever in 2001, which was ridiculous, to attempt it then on the internet as you were describing. What I think about, in order to get to where Greg is talking about, I actually think that if the will of the people of the United States was truly done right now, that problem would be solved. Most of the people want clean air. Most of the people want clean water. What we have is the government that we pay for. And not that we pay for with money, but that certain people, individuals, and corporations in this country pay for with money. And the unspoken contract is, we're going to give you this money to run for office, and you're going to do our bidding. Now, where my mind starts to go to with the blockchain is, and smart contracts, and Ethereum, and maybe Neo, and maybe the next level is, well, what if the people decided that, yes, since we're not going to undo campaign finance anytime soon, what if we, the people, through smart contracts, decided we will pay for you to run for office, but you can't unlock the money until you do what our contracts say you have to do.
Beautiful. I had not heard that one before.
Great point. And I think that's a salon right there too.
I mean, and who holds the lock?
Alexandra?
Yeah.
This is perfect because like the question, the big picture question I'm focused on, what are our new collective mechanism of collective action? And how do we maintain accountability and responsibility? Because theoretically, that's the difference between corporation and government, because both are hierarchical organizations, but the shareholders and the mechanism of interacting, or stakeholders, I guess, are different. But I love that Greg mentioned that we here care about that foundational, relational, culture-making framework, the water that we swim in. So that's the question I'm interested in, is being conscious creators of culture. Because one of the ways we've gone off track is we've made faulty cultural assumptions. And the tragedy of the commons, that meme, is a classic example. The guy who wrote the article, I keep forgetting his name,
Garrett Hardin.
he made that app. That's not what happened to actual commons.
That is true.
The commons, I have not met yet an American who understands what enclosures are. Basically, enclosures are the breakdown. Like, again, I ask nearly everybody, it's like, do you know that's how the commons died? It was the breakdown of the cultural contract. It was not individual people putting out more cows to pastures. It's the landlord decided he no longer wants to be in relationship with the peasants. He just wants to extract all the wealth to himself.
Yes.
So, like, being very mindful of these, like, culture-creating moments. Like, he came up with that meme, completely making it up, and we all, like lemmings, followed it. And
Great points, thank you. And Eric, you had some comment?
So, thank you for that, really important. So, speeding up what we are already doing will not make things better. The benefit of Bitcoin in terms of removing the trust issue is to open up an information commons. But that's very different than a living commons, the water, the air, the sea, the sky, the forest, etc. If we are extracting energy